Hello everyone and welcome to the webcast. My name is Brittany Kavinsky. It is now 1 p.m. so we will begin our presentation shortly. Today on Friday, June 21st, we will have our presentation on transit access given by Carol Kachadoorian, John Tallmadge, Shana Johnson, Lynne Goldsmith, and Bob Patten. For help during today's webcast, please feel free to type your questions in the chat box found in the webinar toolbar to the right of your screen or call 1-800-263-6317. For content questions, please feel free to type those in the questions box and we will be able to answer those at the end of the presentation during the question and answer session. Here's a list of the sponsoring chapters, divisions, and universities. I would like to thank all of the participating chapters, divisions, and universities for making these webcasts possible, as well as the Transportation Planning Division for sponsoring today's webcast. As you can see, we have a couple webcasts scheduled for the rest of the summer. To register for any of these upcoming webcasts, please visit www.utah-apa.org/webcast and register for your webcast of choice. You can also follow us on Twitter at Planning Webcast or like us on Facebook, Planning Webcast Series, to receive up-to-date information on the Planning Webcast Series sponsored by chapters, divisions, and universities. To log your CM credits for attending today's webcast, please go to www.planning.org/CM and select today's date, which is Friday, June 21st, and then select today's webcast, which is Transit Access. This webcast is available for 1.5 CM credits. We are also recording today's webcast and it will be available on our YouTube channel later today. Just search Planning Webcast on YouTube. A PDF of the PowerPoint will be made available upon request. And at this point, I would like to introduce Gabriela Juarez, who will introduce our speakers for today, Carol Kachadoorian, John Tallmadge, Shana Johnson, Lynne Goldsmith, and Bob Patten.
Hello, I am Gabriela, and I am with the City of Los Angeles Planning Department. I am also the Transportation and Planning Division's webinar coordinator. So if all of you listening get really inspired with a great topic, please contact me and we will work to make it as fantastic as the one that you will be enjoying today. I wanted to say that our next great one that will go into more depth on wayfinding will be on July 12th, led by Carrie Tyler from the New York City Department of Transportation, who is fantastic. And I wanted to give a super special thanks to Carol for all of her hard work in coordinating today and our great presenters. I'm really excited about today's webinar, and I will stop talking so that you can enjoy it. Carol, take it on over.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We're very pleased here today to be here today. We do have a poll to begin our webinar. We'd like to get a sense of who's in the audience. I think Brittany is going to launch the poll.
The poll's up now, so we'll give people a few minutes to vote. As of right now, we have about 75% of our poll votes in, and 64% of the respondents are from general planning, 26% are in transportation planning, and 10% are from a transit agency.
Thank you. Well, we're very pleased to have everybody online, particularly the 10% from transit agencies. And we're hoping to get some thoughtful questions afterwards from everyone. So I think we're ready to go. Is my screen visible?
It is.
Great, thank you. I want to review what we're going to talk about today. First, I'm going to give a brief overview of the evolution of transit planning. And then John Tallmadge from Triangletransit is going to talk about bus stop access. Shana Johnson from Foursquare Integrated Transportation Planning is going to talk about some regional bus service support strategies and a little bit about access to rail. Lynne Goldsmith from Los Angeles County MTA is going to talk about rail station access. And another element of rail station access, which is wayfinding, will be covered by Bob Patten from Tool Design Group. So here we are. I've been in the profession for about 30 years. I currently, as a Tool Design Group, develop pedestrian master plans. I've done some ADA transition plans. I've also done some transit access studies. And I worked with the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority for about 11 years. And the last bit of work I did there was working on pedestrian and bicycle access initiatives. I met John Tallmadge when I did some transit access work in Durham, North Carolina. He serves as the head of service planning at Triangle Transit. He also works on bus stop improvements, transportation management programs. He also coordinates efforts with other transit providers in the Triangle region. And he's a really, really thoughtful, well-informed person making a big difference in the Triangle area. Shana Johnson with Foursquare Integrated Transportation Planning does a lot of work. Her work focuses on public transportation, transportation demand management, and that really important transportation land use connection. She's very active in APA and the Women's Transportation Seminar and Young Professionals in Transportation. She's also on TRB's Research Board's Committee on Transportation and Land Development, so she brings a very rich experience to our webinar. Lynne Goldsmith is what I call a rock star in the access to transit field. She just recently, as in earlier this month, retired from the Los Angeles County Metropolitan Transportation Authority, where she was the bike program manager. Beginning in the year 2000, she started early then as the bike modal lead at the agency when the idea of a bike program really didn't exist, and really latched on to the opportunity to build something new just as the bike movement was taken off. Before she left the agency, they put together a bicycle transportation strategic plan, a bike transit implementation plan, and she also, during her time there, established a bike parking program for the agency. So we're very pleased to have Lynne with us. And finally, Bob Patten, who is my colleague at Tool Design Group, is very skilled at bicycle and pedestrian transportation plans. He's done them for cities such as Baltimore, Cincinnati, and Richmond. And he has most recently been really developing a great wayfinding system for transit agencies and trail systems, such as the transit agency in DC. One of the things I appreciate about Bob as a colleague is he really does think outside the box to solve bicycle planning and design issues. Okay, as a reminder, please send us your questions during the presentations. We'll answer them after all the presentations are done. And I'm going to start with a little bit of an overview. I want to make sure that our participants know what we mean when we say access to transit. We can either be talking about the transit vehicle, the conditions at the stop or the station, or traveling to and from the station itself. And what we're really talking about are the last two, conditions at the stop or traveling to and from the station. And the little map in here is something, part of the project we developed in Durham working with John Tallmadge. So you can see how we take a look at what's needed. I'm going to just give you a few quick observations. At the federal level, in terms of the evolution of access to transit, at the federal level, Stacey Liu, a long time ago, really provided funding to increase the emphasis on pedestrian and bicycle transportation planning and laid the foundation for the awareness about that as part of transit access. PROAG and ADAG really set some standards. They are required. It's law. It's a civil right. But historically, transit access planning has really been limited to getting to rail stations by feeder bus, park and ride, or kiss and ride. So in the last 7 or 8 years, there's been more focus on access to transit. Local pedestrian and bicycle plans tend to include transit access as a criteria for project selection. Transit-oriented development has increasingly considered not only how people that live in those developments get to transit, but how people who are living outside that area get to transit. Complete Streets has certainly had an impact on the transportation land use connection and how our right-of-way is built and designed. The important thing to remember here, and you're going to hear it in our presentations, is that multiple agencies have a role in creating complete and safe access. And knowing this and working this really is where your success lies in it when you work on access to transit issues. I want to say a little bit more about land use, transportation, and economic and community development. We know that the transportation land use connection is an important one. APA has published that. It really kind of began with Peter Katz's book a couple of decades ago on the new urbanism. Most recently, a book by Jeff Speck has talked about walkable cities. In that book, he really does talk about the changing demographics of urban areas. And then the National Household Transportation Survey has documented that change, particularly from 2001 to 2009, showing how 16 to 34-year-olds, our next generation, our millennials, are driving less, walking more, biking more, taking transit more. And that information from the National Household Transportation Survey is in this PRG publication, Transportation and the New Generation. I pose a question to you, which is, are we really talking about a hybrid mobility mode, which would be walking, biking, and transit? 3 years ago, Tom Downs wrote an article for CityWire where he suggested that walking, biking, and transit are really about to become the next wave of transportation that shape our urban areas, and that if you think of them together, they're really a new mode of transportation. So given all of this, where are we now? We recognize that there is a desire for transit to be a catalyst for economic development and placemaking. We know that a focus on access to transit improves safety. It can be and it should be responsive to demographic change. It also can be and should be responsive to customer needs. We're going to move on to the next presentation. This is me biking in Tuscany a couple of weeks ago. John Tallmadge from Triangle Transit is next to talk about a coordination primer.
Thank you, Carol.
John, can you unmute yourself?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. That was a quick shot of me biking in front of my home in Durham, North Carolina with my youngest daughter. Triangle Transit is a regional public transportation agency in the Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill, Cary area of North Carolina. And it's limited to providing regional services that connect those communities where there are local services. And in the last 3 years, we've also been responsible for planning and managing the operations and improvements at bus stops for the City of Durham's system. These are modest-sized systems. They're not the LAs of the world, but we have a lot of lessons that we're learning along the way that I think are worthwhile sharing. And I'm glad to know that almost 2/3 of you are from planning departments or planning organizations, because the new relationships that need to be formed are between the transit staffs, the planning departments, transportation planning departments, and as you'll see, lots of other departments in making these improvements at bus stops. This is a quick list of some essential design elements, but one thing as you get into this that you learn is that the devil is really in the details at each project that you want to do, that you have to pay very close attention to many, many details about how different types of users are going to interact with the bus system and get to and from the bus stop, looking at the crossings as well as the connection to from the sidewalk to the bus stop, visibility. This is just a sampling of these elements. Next slide. Some of these are relatively easy. Those are the bunnies. And many of them are these really sticky, complicated issues that involve lots and lots of different players. And what may seem at first like a bunny ends up like a bear as you go through it if you don't have enough experience working through it. Next slide. These are the elements that are, at a very basic level that whoever's initiating the project, whether it's the transit authority or a city planning department or another organization within the city, having a plan for what you want to do, knowing the development rules. I mean, those of you who work in planning departments, that's second nature, but it's not for the transit agencies. And so having that understanding back and forth. The communication beginning at the early stages of the process and throughout the development of the project. And then the feedback is revisiting what are those rules and do they still work for these changes that we would like to see in access to transit, and maybe making changes to some of those rules. And we've got a couple examples. Next one. So this can be as simple as we want to have a new shelter in a place that already has a sidewalk and a decent pedestrian network, or the project that we worked on with Tool Design and Carroll is looking at a 3-mile corridor, a quarter mile on either side, where are there gaps in pedestrian access or biking access to get to the transit stops. And as we went through that process, we learned just how complex that's going to be. Next slide. Up front, you need to get an understanding of who's going to have the approval authority. And for these transit projects, it's not necessarily just limited to site design issues, but there's also approval of the facilities that might happen at the state level. Maybe it's happening at the municipal level. There are often going to be a private property owner who gets to make a decision about whether something's allowed on their property, if you need an easement or a long-term lease. Most of these projects are small enough, or many of the projects that we're talking about are small enough that they're not going to make sense to do condemnation. So you're looking for willing property owners when that's required. Next slide. Here in North Carolina, our Department of Transportation is the major owner of streets and roadways in the state. And so we do a lot of work with various levels of NCDOT's organization. The division office is reviewing all the site plans in their district offices. They have a new requirement that every shelter or other equipment that gets put into the right-of-way is pre-approved, and it's not just a design, but it has to be the specific product by a specific manufacturer. And that has caused a lot of problems because they didn't understand our procurement process, and it ends up slowing us down considerably. And then also on the funding side, or with the Bicycle Pedestrian Division, who on their own is trying to make inroads into completing bicycle and pedestrian networks and thinking about how that affects transit. And the pilot project that Tool Design and Carroll were part of was initiated by a combination of Public Transit Division, Bicycle Pedestrian Division at the DOT, and they worked with us at the City of Durham. And so we're all learning about what are the institutions involved and how do we move from this new way of planning to implementation. Next slide. We often have to interact with the MPOs in North Carolina. We also have RPOs, and there it's often funding, or if we're going to use federal transit funds, those need to be identified in a transportation improvement program, and so there's the bureaucratic end of using federal dollars, also state dollars for making these projects happen. Also, the coordination end on if they are working through with the municipality sidewalk projects, reaching out, they're often not thinking about the transit implications. So we have a number of sidewalk projects where there are bus stops along it. There's a new sidewalk put in, but at the bus stops, the sidewalk was not extended to the back of the curbs, so we don't have an ADA compliant pad, even though it could have simply been incorporated into the project because the communication was not happening. And so, one of the lessons that you repeat here is it's incumbent on the transit agencies to be reaching out to all of these different parties to get them to understand what transit's needs are, or our customers' needs end up being, and getting enough education out to the planning departments, to the transportation planning staff, that they're looking and seeing, oh, I've got this project, maybe transit has an interest in it, and them coming to us. It needs to be a two-way street, and we don't have enough experience with it, at least here in North Carolina, that we're always thinking about each other's projects and how they may benefit one another. Next slide. So at the city staff, the other thing that we've been learning is that it's not just those top three, the planning department, public works, and transportation, that we need to interact with, but there are other departments. Some of them are administrative, but on the next slide, you'll see that there are often economic and workforce development departments in Durham that we work with. There is a community development department, and they all do projects that impact the streetscape or the design of structures in the streetscape that transit can be incorporated into if we're communicating. Next slide. And then the last that I list here is the private property owners, and trying to establish a positive working relationship with them, and getting them on board with understanding what the needs are, how it may benefit them, or mitigating those impacts on their properties. Next slide. And this is where the notion of, as you're going through this process and you're establishing these relationships, and transit agencies are understanding what the planning departments need, or the various other parties, and they're beginning to understand what transit needs, it's time to look at, are the rules that we have in place making sense for where we all want to get? And two examples here that we're still working on to some extent are these shelter specifications. They were doing it so that shelters that are in the state right-of-way are resistant to hurricane-force winds, or the strongest winds that one might experience in different parts of the state. But they didn't understand our procurement process and how cumbersome the system that they were setting up was for us actually purchasing any shelters. And this didn't just affect us in the Triangle part of North Carolina, it's across the state. It just shut down shelter installation for about 8 months as they were trying to install something that they thought was going to improve the process. The second here is looking at unified development ordinances, whatever you may call the development ordinances in your jurisdiction. But here in Durham, it does not include a requirement for a pad, an ADA-compliant pad. You might have a requirement to build a shelter, in which case you need the pad. But if there is no shelter, there's no requirement for a pad. And it's just because the conversation was not happening between transit and the other parts of the city when those things are being developed. So we're going to go back and try and incorporate that into the next versions of the Unified Development Ordinance. Next slide. And that's the end. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, John. Thank you. Okay, our next presenter is Shana Johnson from Foursquare Integrated Transportation Planning. And she's going to share with us some of her work on regional bus corridors and access to rail stations. Shana?
Great. Thank you, Carol. I'm going to be talking about 3 studies that Foursquare AICP has been involved with involving bus stop and rail station access in the metropolitan Washington area. Next slide. Thanks. And the first study I'm going to talk about is a study we did for the implementation guidelines for WMATA's, the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority's Priority Corridor Network. We were also involved in the development of the Priority Corridor Network, and it's actually the map that you see on the slide is of these potentially express bus routes. These are routes today that are high ridership where the potential exists to implement different types of express bus treatments. Some of these corridors already have things like TSP or a couple of other sort of nascent, like an express bus service, limited stop. And the PCN network is about expanding the different types of priority bus treatments that we have on those corridors, including better shelters and access to shelters. So the study we did that looked at the implementation of these corridors, we looked specifically at 6 routes, and I'm going to talk about the field work that I did for 2 of them, which we can go to the next slide. The first one being the Richmond Highway Express, which is already a branded limited stop service. It operates mostly on Route 1, which is Richmond Highway, and most of this route's in Fairfax County. A little bit is in the city of Alexandria. It's Old Town neighborhood, which is a little bit more urban. But predominantly, as you can see in the picture in the slide, it's very, very highly suburban. 2 3-lane arterials, 2 3 lanes in each direction arterials, which is characteristic of actually a lot of these PCN corridors. And today already, for Fairfax County at least, their highest ridership local bus routes are on this corridor. We can go to the next slide. And so this is a picture of a bus stop on the corridor. So you can see there's it's predominantly a lot of strip retail. Behind these strip retail centers, there's the local roads and local buses, which are also have a great deal of ridership because there's a number of market rate affordable multifamily residential development back there. And as you can see, actually in the previous slide, there was a picture that showed this a little bit better. There's oftentimes these highly unused service roads, thanks Carol, like the one shown in the middle picture here, that even separate the big box, the retail, large parking lots from access to these bus stops. The following slide actually shows a few more examples of bus stop, and the bus stop quality really varies in this area. For many stops, right now there's nothing more than just the pole by the side of the road, and because these are really busy, high-speed arterials, they're oftentimes right by the road there. So not only will you be crossing a big box parking lot, an unused service road in many cases, but then you might be right next to the road once you get to the bus stop. We can go to the next slide. The other route that I personally did the field work for was for Leesburg Pike, which is in Route 7, which goes from, again, the King Street area, Old Town, which is an older, more sort of small downtown type of area in the city of Alexandria, through what is, again, mostly a very highly suburban land use, with Route 7 being mostly 2 or 3 lanes in each direction throughout. We can go to the next slide. And Route 7 is also very similar to Route 1 in land use. You can see in this picture that there are market rate affordable housing and multifamily development right next to the service road, right next to the bus stop on the road. In the case where I took this picture, around the time that I took the picture, there was a family with strollers and several young children who are coming out to this bus stop. You can see that there's a little, what we call a goat path, where right behind the bus stop, where the road is, the little sort of dirt self-made road is, where people are clearly standing there. In particular, this disturbed me because as a mother myself, it seemed very dangerous to have especially all of these small children and families waiting at this bus stop right next to cars that were going 40 or 50 miles an hour. The next slide is actually the bus stop across the street, which is a little bit more egregious in the access difficulties. The first thing you probably notice is the utility pole that completely is blocking access to
the bus stop from the front. So what I saw were people walking around this utility pole into Route 7 to access the bus stop, and then you also see again the goat path going around the back of it. It's not well connected. The fence, the black fence behind the bus stop, behind that there's actually another set of apartments, but of course there's no connection between those apartments and this bus stop, and these were both pretty highly well-utilized bus stops. I'm happy to report in this particular case, this is areas that bus stops actually been improved, and I'm sorry I don't have a after picture to show you, but it's now, the pole is not blocking the bus stop, and it's been, a sidewalk's been put in connecting it to the development behind that, so this was kind of a success story after this. You can go to the next slide. Here are a couple of more bus stops on Route 7. Again, one with the service road right behind it, and these benches which look nice, but it's just this little area, this little strip where the benches and the stop are. There's no connection, and there's no pedestrian treatments across this particular part of the route. And that's true actually on Route 1 with Rex, as well as throughout Route 7. You know, even though there's a lot of people crossing these streets to get back and forth between these bus stops, there's not a lot of pedestrian accommodation. So you can also see people not crossing at the light, just sort of a cross when you can mentality to get across these major roads to get to the bus stops. And we can go to the next slide. We also have done a couple of studies looking specifically at bus shelters and its station access improvements related to WMATA's Metro Rail system. So this slide just provides a little bit of background on the Metro Rail system. If for those of you who are not as familiar with it, the service area for WMATA covers 3 states, DC, Maryland, and Virginia, and it's really very different land use without, from very urban in the middle of downtown DC to what's much more sort of typical commute in the morning, commute out, suburban type system at the outer ends of the stations. We can go to the next slide. So recently we did this bus shelter improvement study for WMATA where we evaluated the shelter conditions at 34 Metro Rail stations. And we can go to the next slide. And made some specific improvements. This is an aerial photo of the Anacostia Metro Rail station, and at this station in particular, there were a lot of issues that we identified that were related to station access and to accessing the bus stops at the station that were really quite indicative of what we found throughout the system, including things like jaywalking across bus bays. So in the Anacostia station, we recommended fencing behind the bus bays to actually prevent jaywalking, and new crosswalks and signage to help pedestrians navigate the site safely, as well as other curb ramps and improvements like that that could help people with disabilities being able to access the site safely. Next slide. Finally, I'm going to talk briefly about the station access alternative study that we did for WMATA. In this study, we developed scenarios for 5 case study stations where we looked at that were all auto-oriented in nature, where we looked at how do we shift the mode of access being from today predominantly auto-oriented to alternative modes. The reason being that WMATA is expecting their ridership to grow significantly between now and our study year of 2040, but they don't want to necessarily build any more parking, both because there are other uses for station area, including joint development, that are very appealing to WMATA, and is part of their general policy to try and encourage alternative modes of access to the system. So within each of these case study stations, we developed a number of strategies that we applied to try and look at how we could come up with a mix of strategies that could help each of these individual case study stations move from being auto-oriented access to having a greater variety of modes of access to the stations. So some of the specific strategies we examined included pedestrian bicycle linkages, and as part of the study we also did a peer review. One of the best practices we found was that some transit agencies are actually working with local jurisdictions to fund pedestrian and bicycle access improvements outside their station properties. So in this case, you can see in the map on this slide, WMATA is looking at where their current park and ride clusters are and figuring, well, if they're within half a mile or 2 miles, 5 miles of the station, how could these customers actually feasibly walk or bike to the station with the existing infrastructure in there. We also looked at ride-sharing strategies with an emphasis really on the technology. The difficulty being that because our study year was 2040, of course, between now and then we know technology is going to change a great deal. But for some of the emerging ride-sharing technologies, I'm sure many of you are familiar with things like Sidecar and Uber and all of these new services, some of which people consider to be ride-sharing and some of which are not. Then there's also been a number of other dynamic ride-sharing services. The picture on this slide is showing how a rider can use one of these dynamic ride-sharing apps to, in real time, book a carpool with someone who is coming from, coming from the same area. We can go to the next slide. We also looked at different types of bus strategies that would capture more riders, so encouraging better use of shuttles. In the Washington, D.C. area, there are a lot of apartments that operate shuttle and commercial office buildings that operate shuttles to the metro. Many of these shuttles are operating from adjacent developments or maybe duplicative of existing Metro bus service. So Metro is looking at how do they rationalize and better accommodate shuttles at Metro Rail. They're also looking at what are the possibilities for neighborhood-focused bus service. So this picture is particularly showing the park and ride customers in one neighborhood and existing bus service, and if there were some way to either attract those people to using the existing bus service or to change routes or to develop some type of neighborhood service that would be able to capture these residents rather than having them drive just 1 mile to the next Metro Rail station. Finally, we looked at, next slide, some parking strategies. We looked at a number of parking strategies, again with an emphasis on technology that we know is kind of available in the next few years, including having real-time parking information. If you go to the airport, some airports today, they'll show you exactly where to park. So we were thinking, if we had this type of information at a transit station, if you were able to wake up in the morning, look at your app and say, well, the parking at my station is full now, which is the case in many of WMATA's stations, maybe I'll drive to the next station, or maybe I'll take a bus, or maybe I'll get on a dynamic ride-sharing app this morning and change my plans for how I was going to access the station. And so with that, I'll turn it back over to Carol. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shana. I think as participants can see, we're really building a lot of great information for you in terms of policies, coordination, kind of the devil's in the detail, approaches to transit access. Lynne Goldsmith is next, and she's going to give us some whys and hows based upon her experience. Lynne?
Thank you very much. I've been bumped off the audio 3 times, so let's hold our breath. This will work well. Good morning, everyone, because for me it is good morning still. It's really a pleasure to be on this panel. I hope that my perspective as a planner inside a transportation agency can be helpful to you. I really love John's reference to the bunny and the bear because it's tough, and those of us involved need tough skins. We need to have a passion for this work, and my job involved coordination with at least 8 different departments or independent agency functions, all of which had very strong interests and points of view. Transportation agencies need to take on more of the cost and responsibility to make what I will be proposing possible. The cities just don't have the funding for this. Our goals as planners are to plan facilities that encourage transit trips and replace more driving to stations. But to do this today, we have to challenge the traditional way of doing things. We need champions from the public and the elected officials to make this happen, because we can't do it alone. I'm assuming many of you work for consulting firms, which it sounded through the poll like you might be, and developing environmental documents and conceptual designs for projects. You'll need to push the envelope. And remember, be practical and not too theoretical. I know that's tough for some of us planners, but bring the language down to the everyday. Realize that your audience is not going to speak your language. And then next, to plan for current and future populations, not past populations. And these populations have different expectations and different desires. Change comes from many directions, so find those people inside the agency that are your allies. We're all part of the solution and a new direction. Okay, I'll be touching on some obvious solutions to past approaches. Many of you might be fully aware of this, but from my experience, it appears the focus has often been on operational issues, how to move the trains and buses, not how to get people there. So that's what we need to be thinking about. How do we get people there? So there's a cultural shift, and that shift Carol referred to with the millennials in her introduction. This is actually our opportunity, and I'm really excited about it, to be honest with you. I see a great future. And so we need to think, do we as planners follow or do we lead? So next slide, we found in Los Angeles County, surprisingly or maybe not, that 85% of people access our stations by walking, bicycling, or rolling, which I thought was kind of fun. But what I think this reflects is our traditional populations for using public transit, and we want to get those newer people also using public transit. So that the people that might have a car but choose instead to change to transit. So the next slide tells us that, the next slide, okay, anyway, what I wanted to
shift the slide again?
I got it. We need to change the hierarchy of the transportation modes, and my guess is that the first consideration is often, where's the parking lot going to be? How big is it going to be? We can go back to the previous slide for a minute. But the funds can be made available providing alternatives and reducing the parking demand. Mobility. That means moving all users, not just buses and trains. You'll find many policymakers that use this term think of it as buses and trains only, so we need to change that way of thinking. Also, we need to incorporate improvements into our project scopes, designs, and costs at the conceptual stage, so they won't be value engineered out. How many times have you heard through the design phase, and this has been said to me so many times, oh, but it's too early to talk about that now. And then when the time is right, it's too late to talk about that now. There's no space. So those are the things we have to think about. Think about how to attract users by improving the convenience, visibility, and safety. Consider where people are coming to, from, and going to, and providing good connectivity. Consider improvements as mitigation measures in environmental impact reports and statements. These cannot be cut later through value engineering. Avoid words like betterment, amenities, or maximums, because these are not essential, because they are not seen as essential to the project. When determining an impact to bicycling or walking, avoid basing the analysis on the existence of facilities, master plans, or counts of people walking and bicycling. This misses the point. These things are not required to prove a negative impact on bicycling and walking. People need a choice to travel safely and conveniently, or they won't do it. When you provide that choice, they will do it. Next is just shows the quick hierarchy. I got this from WMATA's study, showing pedestrians at the top of the hierarchy. I'm proposing we change our hierarchy. Okay, next. Okay, so the next slide shows the kinds of attributes we need to be thinking about. Is remember, as we design, remember that the users should be thought of first. Think and plan pathways to, from, and through stations. Reduce the conflicts and distances people need to go on foot. People will pick the shortest distance, so we need to acknowledge that in our planning. Improve visibility so people feel safe going places and know where they're supposed to go without hunting. Locate elevators conveniently and within view. Consider stair channels for bicycles.
Lynn, did we lose your audio? Brittany, can you tell? Excuse us for a moment, folks.
Yeah, I'm not hearing Lynn right now. Lynn, do you want to check and see if you're muted on your phone? Lynn, let's see if we can get you switched over to your mic and speaker setting. Go over into the GoToWebinar toolbar. On the audio tab, select mic and speakers.
Brittany, how are we doing? This is Carol.
Lynn, I'm still seeing that it seems like maybe we lost her on the phone. I'm not sure if she lost her phone connection. It's not showing up as green anymore. I'll try to give her a call.
Okay, do you want me to...
Okay, she came back.
Hi.
There we go.
Oh, great.
Sorry. I don't know why I keep losing audio. But I realized I was talking, I kept saying, Carol, please change the slide. Carol, please change the slide. Anyway, after design attributes, that's where I left off. I don't know where you guys, if you went ahead. Did you?
We didn't go ahead. We're still on the design attributes slide.
Okay, next slide, please. Carol?
I just changed it.
Okay, because I'm not seeing it. Okay, this is, okay, there finally. Okay, good. An emphasis on all access will require coordination with the local jurisdictions. Existing on-street approaches, crosswalks, signal timing, and signage most likely will need to be evaluated and improved as part of transit projects. That's what I'm advocating. Next slide. We're going to go through the next series of slides rather quickly if if we can get the slide change to go quickly. And I'll pose a question for each. These are examples of lessons learned and questions to answer when designing stations. In this one, is there access from the station to the housing? Have we planned for that? Next slide. Is bicycle parking within view of the station and easily accessible? This is a great example of a station where there's 230 feet to the bicycle parking and it couldn't be seen from the station. Okay, next slide. Are sidewalks safe, unobstructed, and inviting? So have we made changes to the approaching pathways in our sidewalks? Next, are barriers in the way? Or are detours, are we providing or creating detours that make people walk further? Next, are pathways lit, inviting, wide enough, and safe? This is a before and a proposed after shot. Next, the next slide shows a lot of changes that can be made at intersections with a before and an after picture. Are crosswalks well marked and ramps installed? Is signal timing long enough for someone with a walker to cross? Are refuges provided where streets are wide? Have no right turns at intersections been considered? Are stop bars installed? So the next slide will show about walkways. Are walkways wide enough? This is an example of a walkway to a station which was pretty much constructed in the minimum to meet the minimum requirement. Minimums are not good enough.
Did we lose Lynne again? Brittany, can you tell?
It looks like she should be fine, but okay. Yeah, I think maybe her telephone connection is going in and out because her icon keeps going from green to gray again. So I guess let's give her a minute and see if her phone comes back on.
And so while we're waiting for Lynne, here's an example of a stairway that has a bike tray on it. So you can take your bike down, and the question is the slope too steep?
Steep, yes. I'm back.
To be really functional. Welcome back.
So much for, I've got a landline, but so much for these portable phones. Anyway, the next slide, because we're towards the end of this presentation now. You'd be happy to know. The next slide is about bicycle parking. Free bicycle parking should always be provided near the station entrance. Next slide shows covered parking. And this is an option that the public will love you for if you provide, go to the trouble of providing more and better protection for bicycles from the sun and the elements. The next one is high demand stations. Provide secure bicycle parking within close proximity, and then plan for an expansion of that parking. These stations can hold 800 or more bicycles and provide more security. The next slide is just to think about bike share. Bike share is a big new thing. Is there room for it, for either adding it or expanding it later? And making room when space is tight is really a tough challenge. So with that, the last one is I wanted to review some challenges that I've seen to how to make change in our planning. There's a lot of resistance a lot of resistance from internally in agencies, because they're used to doing things in a certain way, and that the change of thinking comes slowly. So realize that that's going to be true. There are spatial constraints, interjurisdictional coordination challenges, and then finding the funding and thinking differently about funding some of these improvements and incorporating them more into the transit projects. And then, boy, it sure doesn't hurt to have a champion or two, and if they're an elected official, it's even better. So the last slide, I go over just some of the benefits which are obvious to all of us, which are this increases our mode shares, increases our transit ridership, improves our transit service, reduces greenhouse gas emissions, which we're all trying to do, energy use and parking, and the result is a better quality of life, a new way of living, and economic growth for the community, which is something we really need to convince our communities and our business people of, because it will benefit them. These improvements will benefit them. And my last slide is a fun slide, because I loved this picture. We now have a peddler's creamery in Los Angeles where they make ice cream by pedaling a bicycle. And the next two slides, one is a list of resources, and the other is just an image of a bicycle in front of a freeway congestion, just to leave you with an image that we can change. Okay, thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Lynn. That was wonderful. I love this last photo. Okay, our last presenter is Bob Patten. Bob is a colleague of mine at Tool Design Group, and he's going to talk with us about a particular aspect of access to rail station, finding your way. Bob?
Thank you. I apologize. I'm the one with the cold and coughing in the background when the mute is turned on. I'm going to talk first about the lessons learned, then about some basics about planning guide signs for cyclists, and then some methodology specifically for planning guide signs for cyclists to and from transit stations. First lesson learned is putting up signs seems really simple. It's not. It's complicated, but it is doable. It does take some extra effort from what most people expect it's going to take when they embark on the task. We have been asked to do wayfinding planning just for bicyclists. I think most transit agencies and communities will find that if they're going to put up signs, they will probably want to be thinking about bicyclists, people with disabilities, and pedestrians. There are some differences, but the signage system may be best if it's designed to work and accommodate each of the modes, their differences, and their common paths. And like all the previous speakers, agency coordination is critical. When you go to put up a sign, it depends on whose property it is, and that they will have a say as to whether the sign goes up and what's on it, and they may have sign design parameters to offer. So it's good to start with coordination and find out what all the ground rules are. Bicyclists wayfind in a way that's different from cars and different from pedestrians as well. Bicyclists will, the big advantage of bicycling is you can travel as a pedestrian when that is convenient, and you can travel as a motor vehicle when that is convenient. And it's important to know that in planning your signed route, because you don't want to sign routes that you think bicyclists should use, but they never will use because they're counterintuitive to the cyclist. It's important to think about which cyclists you're signing for, local residents, tourists, skill level. The key thing is that you're not providing signs for the people who are already cycling, who are regular cyclists, who are already biking to and from the transit system, because if they're already doing it, they probably already know their way around. So you're signing for new customers. What information is helpful related to transit? The name of the transit center. In some communities, they have multiple names of transit centers, so it's good to get clear on that. Other destinations. We started providing navigational aid signs, helping cyclists know when they should actually use crosswalks and sidewalks as opposed to the street. Now, in the MUTCD, which is the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices, there are 3 kinds of basic sign shapes and designs for bicycle wayfinding. And for transit access, we tend to recommend what we call the fingerboards, or the narrow panels, because transit access signage is usually located in an area around the transit station as opposed to over a longer distance route of 3, 5, 10 miles. These 2 options are really geared more for longer continuous routes. You will see these signs in the MUTCD, but you probably will not need them for bikeway access to transit. The MUTCD has a lot of good standards in it. Very important ones to follow have to do with the location of the arrows on the sign and the order of the destinations relative to the arrows. Font size, font type, the green retro-reflective background. There are a whole variety of details that are explained there. So in doing a signage effort for a transit system, it's important to first really clarify your goals and to get consensus amongst higher-up people with regard to these goals, because you're going to have to encounter a lot of that resistance that Lynne spoke about. Then you need to assess what are the information needs that the cyclists have. In the Washington, D.C. area, cyclists need to find the elevators because to take their bike on the train, they have to access the station using an elevator. They can't use escalators or stairs. And so you may have some particular information needs that are particular to your transit system. These are our general principles. Finding a balance between safety, directness, comfort, and convenience. Reducing the user's potential for confusion. That's your main objective in providing wayfinding signs. It's important to evaluate the bicyclist's needs separate from the other modes, but as I said at the beginning, when you actually apply your signage system, you may want to be combining guidance for various modes on one sign or at one sign location to be more efficient. And another key thing is wayfinding signage can help cyclists avoid hazards and find routes that are not so intuitive. Oftentimes in the urban or especially the suburban environment, cyclists looking visually on the landscape, it can be very hard to tell which way do I go if I want to generally go this way or that way. How to get out of the station, how to navigate around all those immediate things that block your view, like gigantic hedges. Where possible, combine signage for cyclists to the transit station with signage for other modes. It's also important to evaluate the conditions of the bicycling route and make sure that it has some basic level of adequacy for bicycling so you're not guiding people onto a very unsafe condition. It's important in providing signs on a site to recognize that bikes do mix with automobile traffic in the regular street environment, and they can do so in a transit facility. Many transit facilities provide exclusive areas for buses. It's, I think, good a practice to keep the cyclists also out of the bus loops so that those are exclusive areas for buses. whether or not how much you address the issue of egress routes from a station will have a lot to do with whether your transit system allows bikes on the system, and whether people might be taking their bike to use it at the end of their trip, and what types of destinations your transit system serves that aren't just a downtown employment type destination, what type of trail connections they have, major recreation areas, or satellite communities. More and more there is employment centers that are located outside of the city center. It's important, if you have maps in your transit system for wayfinding for pedestrians around a station, that the signed routes coordinate with the routes that are shown on the maps. And that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Bob. Now we're going to have a Q&A period, so I'm hoping that you all have sent in some really great questions for our group, and I think Brittany is going to manage the Q&A session. Brittany?
All right. Our first question comes in from Kristen. What is Kiss and Ride? She's heard it in the program twice, and I don't think she caught a definition for it.
Well, I can
Kiss and Ride is
I'm sorry, Shana?
No, it's okay. Go ahead, Carol.
Okay. A Kiss and Ride area is an area at a rail station that provides very, very short-term parking. It's really drop-up parking for a transit passenger who is getting a ride to the station from somebody else. It could be a spouse, it could be a parent, it could be a friend. And there needs to be space at the station and a circulation system for the motor vehicle to come into the station, stop for a moment so the transit rider can get out and get to the station entrance in a safe way so that they're not, hit by a bus in the bus loop. One of the things that typically happens with Kiss and Ride is we provide really primary real estate for Kiss and Ride passengers so that they're inclined to do that. That means they're very close to the station entrance. And in terms of access to stations for bicyclists and pedestrians, this could provide potential conflict for them.
All right. Our next question comes in from James. What has been your experience with private development-funded bus stop improvements and coordination of state and local officials?
Could you read the beginning of that question again, please?
Sure. What has been your experience with private development-funded bus stop improvements and coordination of state and local officials?
Okay. John, is that one you could answer, please?
Sure. We've had good success in Durham and working with towns of Cary and Raleigh in recent years because they've added more detail and more requirements to their unified development ordinances. In which case, it forces the private developers to act, and when they set up the rules, they're in compliance with state transportation rules. Where we don't have good success is where it's not a requirement, or it's just simple. Sometimes there are simple changes to the property that don't require it to go through the full site development process. And in those cases where it's optional, we often end up without any of the improvements being made. I think the lesson there is making sure that you get them documented well in the local rules for development.
This is Carol. I just want to add to that. As is the case in North Carolina, and it may be in other areas where the local jurisdiction has a limited amount of right-of-way, and the transit stop, the bus stop, the shelter in particular is placed on private property, you may get the property owner to agree to have that shelter installed, but then you need an easement or an agreement with the property owner so that you can maintain the shelter. So it remains safe and comfortable for transit users. So that's kind of the next step to take.
Okay, great. And this question comes in from Emily. What criteria do you use to determine if a bus pull-off or a bus bulb is better?
John, I think that's you again.
I'm glad that the question came up next because I was just thinking, I mean, one thing that we sometimes end up with if we're not closely involved with the transportation planning office is a bus pullout in a place where we don't want to use one. This also happens in the design of some of the DOT street or roadway widenings where some entities, some of the players think, well, if there's going to be a bus stop, we want a bus pull-off because we want the traffic to be able to slow and not back up behind it. But, and, you know, the operation, once we get into operation, we tell them we're not going to use it because we can't get back into the flow of traffic. So we're going to be letting people off either at the curb just beyond it or into the bus bay itself. I think in, you know, the only examples where we would prefer a pullout is if we're in a roadway that's perhaps 45 miles an hour, or it's a location where we know we need dwell time, either because the loadings are great enough that we're going to be there for a couple of minutes, loading everybody, or it's the end of the line and we have built-in dwell time in the schedule. And those are much more limited. The opportunities to bring the curb out so that there's more waiting space, so it shortens the crossing distance, is preferred. That's the harder one to get everyone else to agree with.
Just for those of you who may not, you've heard, John used the term dwell time, and it may be intuitive to what that is, but just to be sure, it's the time that the bus spends at the stop for passengers to get off and passengers to get on. And there is an assumed dwell time for each when they're putting the route together. So that's the reference that John was making.
Thank you, Carol. The other is, if it's at the end of the line, it gets built in sometimes as catch-up because there's variability in the traffic, and so sometimes we'll build in some waiting time at the end of the line so that it can start its next trip on time. That's another reason why we might have a bus sitting in a location for several minutes.
Thank you. Brittany, do we have another question?
Yeah, this one comes in from Joseph. I think it was Lynne that commented on mobility in terms of modes, and he's always viewed mobility in terms of people, not modes or places. Can you talk a bit more about your idea, Lynne?
Okay, well, modes are transit, bicycling, walking, any way of getting to the station. So, or any way of getting around, any way of being mobile, I guess I might say. So I hope that the question just shows how modes are not necessarily, and mobility for that matter, those terms are not universally understood the same way. So that's what's kind of interesting about the question to me. But I think it's about what method do people get to where they want to go. I hope that answers the question. Thank you.
All right, this question comes in from James. Can the presenters discuss the importance of local plans in facilitating private funding?
That's a good question. Who wants to offer? Lynne, do you have something to offer?
Okay, repeat the question, please.
Discuss the importance of local plans in facilitating private funding.
That's a That's not one that is easy for me to answer. It sounds like a good city planning department question, actually. This is one thing I could offer, though, because I'm thinking of an example of a bike path that we wanted to see. It's part of the LA River, and we wanted to see this major connection being built, and we realized that the property owner, was not supporting the city building a bike path there. Well, then the property owner came in and they wanted to do a huge expansion of their development. So as part of a mitigation, the city required them to, and they volunteered actually, because they probably knew this would help their project, to build that bike path. So does anybody have another way to answer a question like that?
This is Shana. I can talk a little bit to that and some of the TDM experience that we've had working with jurisdictions who are looking at these issues of how do they create a policy or a framework for developer contributions that ties together more with whatever their small area plan is or their comp plan and what they want to achieve, and to get those specific improvements, whether it's making sure that there's going to be a sidewalk at the development or a bike share station, the bus stop, access to the bus stop, sort of right type of bus stop for wherever that development may be. And I think that, I guess my takeaway is that it is really important to have something in a local plan, whether it's your small area plan for what you want to see in that particular place, in terms of these different types of infrastructure improvements that include bus stops and access to bus stops or to rail stations, but also things like just a bus stop improvement plan if the transit agency or whoever the property owner is or who's responsible for maintaining the bus stops, which of course could be a number of different types of organizations, that they are if you're a local planner and you're going through the development process, that you are aware of those, so that when you're negotiating the developer contributions, you can be like, oh well, we're doing this bus stop improvement. We need some of your contributions to come to that at your site. So that's sort of my takeaway for the relationship between developer contributions and local plans.
This is John. I would say the other value of having a local plan that addresses this is to make decision makers aware of the scope of the need. I think that it's something that is invisible to a lot of local elected officials, and if we identify a need that we know is not going to be funded just with public dollars, it brings more minds to the problem to think about how can we entice private investment in this, whether it's in some places it does it through advertising concessions at the shelters, and not doesn't mean you just get shelters, but you get improvements to the access immediately around it. I mean, that's one example of where private dollars have been brought in because they're also getting a return on it.
Thank you, John. And there's that great example in Portland where Portland Streetcar, there's a corporation of business owners along the streetcar in downtown Portland, in Portland, that helped to fund it. And the shelters are really sponsored and paid for by some of those businesses. So that's a very great example of how private property owners and businesses can support access to transit. Any other comments from the panelists on this question? Okay. Brittany, do we have another question?
Yeah, this one comes in from Scott. It's kind of piggybacking on the previous question. Wouldn't local planning or economic development staff frame that contribution within the context of workplace commute improvements? After all, within the context of corporate relocation studies, commute times and options are a concern. One would think that they would jump at the chance to help.
Shana?
Yeah, I'd say sure. I mean, I don't know if I would say jump at the chance to help, because yeah, it depends so much on the context and the type of development, the jurisdiction, all of those different factors. Certainly, in some areas where there are, like you described, Carol, in Portland, a very robust business community where there might be a business improvement district or another similar type of downtown organization that can be involved. Yeah, and definitely one of the first things they're going to think of is employee commutes. On the development side, just to go back to what I was talking about a few minutes ago with the previous question, that, you know, the developer, they're, you know, not necessarily concerned with what the commute is going to be like of either the residents who are living there or the businesses who will be working there. But certainly from the public sector side and from the public side, what they're going to be concerned about is the trips, and particularly commute trips in and out of those developments. So I think when we're trying to attract private partners, that's something that definitely I know that we emphasize in our work, looking at the commute trips and commute trip reduction.
Could I comment on this too?
Yes, please.
My experience is from the transit agency side, not from the city planning side, but this is my observation on this. Developments or developers will not voluntarily do something like this. It's up to a planning commission, from what I've seen in practice here. It's up to the planning commission to require it as part of plan approval. And then the city councils would then, you know, vote on it too once it goes through planning commissions. But I've not seen anything come forward really willingly, because this adds cost to their project, let's face it. So that's just my observation. There needs to be coaxing.
This is John. I would agree with that. I mean, I think if you think about the employers that you might hope would be most interested in making the contributions, often these are the ones that are going to economic development agencies and saying, here's how many millions of dollars we want to be able to stay in your community. I mean, they're often asking for public dollars to make investments in their core business. Now, there are definitely exceptions to it, and there's the Googles of the world that provide their own transit system. But I think those are more the exceptions, and codifying the requirements is crucial. You know, I mean, here in North Carolina, there's often a big gap between where the public right-of-way ends and where the beginning of the building is. Suburban design, and they may be interested in making some improvements on their piece of the property, but for a transit user, there's still a big gap between where the public right-of-way ends and those front doors.
Thank you. Do we have another question, Brittany?
Yeah, this one's from James. Are tire guides used for stair access?
Are tire guides?
Yes.
Could you read the question? Yeah, could you read the question again, please?
The question is, are tire guides used for stair access? Maybe, James, if you wouldn't mind clarifying what you mean on this question.
I think it probably refers to that photo of the tire channel that was on the edge of the stairwell.
So
Yes.
tire width, perhaps.
This is Lynn speaking. I'm the one that showed that picture, and we are in the process right now of evaluating stair channels. There is not really good guidance on this at the moment, and it isn't used a lot. It's been experimented with, but not used a lot here in the United States that I know of. BART experimented with it. We're experimenting with it, and maybe some other agencies are too. So there isn't really good design guidance yet. I think the Metro our agency is going to be doing an evaluation of our current facility, and hopefully something new will come out of that. But one of the major problems we found with stair channels, at least if we wanted to implement them here, is that the stairs are just too darn steep. So even if you wanted to do the right thing and put in stair channels, if the stairs are too steep, it's very hard for most bicyclists, and by most I mean, you know, women, younger people, people maybe without as much strength, to use stair channels. So it's still very much a topic of discussion.
Thank you, Lynn. And if you're commuting to work or you're going to a family outing and a picnic and you've got a lot of weight with you on your bike, even if your bike is light to begin with, those stair channels can be hard to navigate your bike up or down. A couple of years ago when I did a bike trip in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam, there was this beautiful new bridge with a very gentle arch to it. And the steps for people, for pedestrians, were very short, so that it wasn't difficult to navigate as a pedestrian. There was an accompanying chair bike tray next to it, which was very easy to use, and it has to do with the steepness and the slopes. So I just want to echo Lynn's comments about that. Okay, any other questions? I know we're getting close to the end of our time here.
That's actually all the questions I have in right now. So unless we have any more, urgent questions people want to send in, the email addresses for all of our presenters are listed on the screen right now. So you can feel free to jot down those email addresses and follow up with any presenter, and they'll be happy to answer any of your questions. So with that, I guess I can go ahead and take it over and go through just a few reminders on how to log your CM credits for attending today's event. Thank you, Carol, and all of our presenters for a wonderful presentation today.
Thank you, Brittany. It's been enjoyable for all of us, I think.
Okay. So for those of you who are still with us, I'm just going to go over a few reminders. First off, to log your CM credits for attending today's event, please go to www.planning.org/CM. Select today's date, which is Friday, June 21st, and then select today's webcast, which is Transit Access. This webcast is available for 1.5 CM credits. We are also recording today's event, and it will be available on our YouTube channel later today. If you are interested in a PDF of this PowerPoint, just send a email to planningwebcast@yahoo.com. And with that, this concludes today's session, and I want to thank everyone again for attending.